All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Serious Angler podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bailey. I said my last name wrong. That's embarrassing.
How you jack that up, dude? Come on now.
Yeah,
Get the game together. Okay,
I mean,
pause.
it's new though, right? You haven't had it.
Let's go.
I gotta back out. We're gonna start a whole new stream, and we'll see you guys in it. As always, joined with me, Mr. Adam Deacon, and two familiar faces down here with a big old beard, and Mr. Bass Quest. What's going on, fellas? Yeah, not as big of a beard.
Nothing much, man. Just chilling. Here with you to talk about fishing. I like talking about fishing, so I think I'm gonna enjoy this. We're gonna enjoy this. You know, it's gonna be good.
Absolutely.
Maybe. Who knows? We'll have to see.
Caleb, what are you up to?
Things are always good because we end up opening our big mouths and saying things we shouldn't say.
That's it.
Right, you get all the secrets given away if you're not careful.
Uh-oh. We just need to swap that Dr. Pepper with some Bud Light so we can really get some juice out of Caleb.
You gotta go full Tennessee and have a natty light. I don't quite have the mullet going though. So.
Oh no. Are you guys drinking Milwaukee Best down there at all, or is that just a New York thing?
I've never even heard of Milwaukee.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
But it must be a New York thing. Never mind. Deacon, what are you up to, dude? How's good old Colorado?
It's good, man. It's been hot for the fall. It doesn't quite feel like fall. Sold the boat, so that's good. On to looking for another boat. So if anyone's got a lead on a boat, let me know. I guess I should probably have some more parameters than that. But anyways, looking for
something that floats
boat outside.
Anyone who've got 10-foot John boats. I mean, really, no. No, man, life's good. Got a lot of kind of some championship style events this fall that I'm excited for. And from there, man, just living life.
Cool. Yeah, dude. Can you slap a 250 on a Hobie?
Don't know how that would work.
That would be good content for sure.
It's viral content there.
Yeah.
Just start at 1 horsepower and just start leveling up and just see exactly how far you can take it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's 75 horsepower on the Hobie. Here we go.
I feel like a kayak would sink so fast with the 250 on. How much do those things weigh? 1,000 pounds?
Oh, yeah, like the 4 strokes. Yeah, 800 pounds.
Yeah, it'd be like. You have to line and then drop shot your Hobie.
Yeah, there you go. Well, boys, if you guys did not know, Adam here qualified for the national team championship down in Alabama. It's at Eufaula, right, Deacon?
Yeah, on Eufaula.
Man,
hopefully, what's that?
I've heard that's an awesome lake.
Me too. I've never been. I'm really excited, but no, I've never been. Just seen a lot of footage on that thing. But December, I'm curious to see what it'll fish like in December. So I'm glad to get you guys on to talk about a little bit of fall fishing because I could see it.
Yeah.
Still late fall,
Yeah. What's funny? We were on the way to the beach one time, and it was me, Bethany's friend, and we were going with her family to the beach. And we passed by Eufaula Lake on the way there, and Bethany's friend cracks off and goes, "What's Eufaula?" I said, "What?" She goes, "What's Eufaula?" I said, "Eufaula," and I was like, she said on the side it says Eufaula Lake. I said, "That's Eufaula." She goes, "Oh, okay." And I was like, and ever since then, every time somebody says Eufaula, I'm like, it's called Eufaula. You don't want to go down there and get the Eufaula.
Sounds like a disease of some sort.
Yeah. You don't want to get the Eufaula, son.
That's
that ain't
the
good.
bad stuff right there.
Dude, my grandfather was joking one time because they live in Florida now, and he couldn't really pronounce Okeechobee a while ago, so he called it Lake Chewbacca. So he jokes about it all the time now. You going to fish Lake Chewbacca?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But so as Adam mentioned, we are here to talk some fall fishing. Personally, it's becoming one of my favorite times of year, almost surpassing that fun spring bite, especially if you can dial it in, because I do think to an extent fall fishing can be a little bit more confusing than fishing in the springtime. But once you do figure it out in the fall, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but I mean, you almost have a better chance of catching a true giant in the fall than you do in that springtime. But
yeah, sort of. I think that I think you get a lot more chances to catch big ones in the spring, but I think when you swing on one in the fall, like when you do swing, it's usually that better than average fish. That's what I love about it so much. Is it seems like I don't catch as many, but when I catch one, it's that 4 to 5 pound plus class fish. That's what I love about the fall so much.
What I get from the fall is like tons and tons of numbers. Like I can go out and catch these schooling fish. A lot of these fish like pot up together, and it's all different sizes of fish. You know, down here in the South, like in the fall time, these fish are not like, it's not like the spring where you pull up to a point and you start firing out there with a trap, and you pull up to one point, it's like all 3 and 4 pounders, and you pull up to the next point, it's all 4 to 6 pounders. Like it's everything together. Like you'll catch a 14-incher and have a 9-pounder eat it off the end of a jerkbait at the boat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like everything's together. It can be difficult to like find the right size fish, but you can go out and catch insane numbers down here. I always feel like the spring, like the winter time and spring for us is probably the best time to catch a true giant. And I'm thinking like winter to early pre-spawn. But the fall is awesome because of that urgency. Like those fish, like they start to see those, you know, the days are getting low a lot faster. You know, just like the window of time that they can feed is shorter. It's getting colder outside. It's like just they put the feed bag on, so it can be super fun.
Yeah, and that's what's cool, kind of like about Caleb. Caleb, like it's strange because I say this even though we're so close together. I mean, Caleb's only an hour and a half away. But like Chickamauga and Nickajack set up completely different than Watts Bar and Loudon.
Oh, yeah.
And then those two set up completely different than all the Highland reservoirs around.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, what's crazy is, like, Caleb will be catching schooling bass, you know, on flats with a spook on Chickamauga. You can't do that on Watts Bar in the same day with practically the same water conditions, and you're literally just one lake up.
Wow.
Like, that's how diverse the state of Tennessee is, and really the South is, because then you go down to Pickwick and Wheeler and all those places, and it's a completely different bite. And you would think it all being the same river system, it all being essentially the same lake and the same water, but it's completely different worlds depending on what side of the big concrete wall you're on when it comes to those dams. It's nuts.
And I feel like the bite up north is so much better in the fall time because you guys have that urgency a lot quicker. And it's like a really narrow window. So when those fish decide to munch, like Ben catching that freaking monster the other day, did you see pictures of that?
Yeah.
6
pound.
That little lake that I caught my big bag when I was down there in the spring. But just again, it's that urgency thing. But still, you don't have quite the thickness on the fish down here that you do up there. Right. It's like y'all's fall fish are as fat as your spring fish. We don't really get that as much over here.
Yeah, and that may be my bias in my regard to, you know, catching a true giant. Like I wouldn't say easier, but having a better chance in the fall than the spring. And this is actually an interesting conversation. We'll get into fall fishing here in a second, but this is a fun conversation to have. And this is something that Andrew and I have discussed. And he talks about how, like, over the summer, especially in regards to northern smallmouth, that these fish are putting on eggs starting in that summer and translate as they get in the fall. Now you have all that egg weight, but then, you know, that first couple of really cold, like pressure systems that move through that really start changing the water temperatures. That's when those fish kind of realize. We're going to talk about this as we go through in fall fishing. Like you said, that urgency, right, Caleb, of them to start feeding with that massive, you know, mode of I need to eat, and then having all that weight build up in such a short period of time. That's why I think they weigh more, at least in my mind, for northern fish in the fall than they would in the spring, because they have that egg build up and they have a crazy feed bag on.
Yeah, they're not coming out of like that super harsh winter sitting there under the ice in the dark. You know what I mean? Like our fish, they don't have as much urgency. It seems like my best fall bite is like November, you know, middle to end of November. It's like the best. And then it transitions. The winter time to me is like prime time. If you're going out there to catch a monster, you know, we don't get winters like you do over here. So, you know, water temps are going to get down to what do you say, Alex? Like 40, 42?
Yeah. I mean, like we'll have like we'll have a strange year where it'll drop down below freezing and just the backs of the pockets will freeze. But I mean, on average, you're talking lowest you're going to find is going to be like Highland Reservoir like Norris or Cherokee, and it might get into the high 30s.
Yeah.
And that's it. You know, the
Yeah.
rest of it's going to be mid 40s.
I'll see high 30s in a creek. But the thing is, these fish, they move out main lake, and so they're sitting in that stable water. So a lot of these fish, they never see temperatures below 43. You know, they get out there on the main river channel as soon as it starts getting cold, and they just got those stable temperatures. You know, they're pumping water out of the bottom of the dam up there. Usually get a lot of rain in the wintertime. So you think about that water down there in 70, 80. I mean, how deep do you think the water comes in out of Watts Bar? 100 foot?
Oh, yeah, 100, 150, 200 feet at some points. I mean, just
that
depends.
temperature, geothermal, probably, 60 degrees almost pumping through. You know, the what do you call those nuclear power plants and stuff. It's like we haven't had a real good winter in 5 years, which is one reason why Chickamauga is like everyone thinks it's declining. It's really, you know, half of it's fishing pressure, but the other half is you have to have a shad kit. You have to have extreme cold conditions in order to get the right bite. It's just like what Milliken caught down there in Texas, what Mikey Balls caught down there in Florida a couple years back. When you get true cold fronts, that's when the freaks come out.
You think it'd be the same thing on Chick, like as Old Ivy, if you guys had a winter?
Yeah, it was.
Like that?
2014 through about 2017, we had really cold winters. A couple times the lake actually froze over where you could only get in a couple ramps. It's like the main river channel itself was the only place that wasn't frozen, and it was insane. Like
that's when the state record was caught.
Is if you're throwing your bait onto ice and bringing it off.
Yeah.
It's ungodly.
And I mean, those years, that set of years right there where it got that cold, the coldest year is when we had the state record was caught.
Yep.
And it's like it's that colder weather does something to those fish, especially the big ones.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like any other animal in the environment, whether it's a giant deer or a predator or whatever it is, you know, like a mountain lion isn't going to lay and freeze to death. They're going to get up and go try to kill something. And so that mountain lion or whatever the predator in the environment that it may be that, you know, would normally just kind of stay idle and not move around as much, it's forced to go and move, and it's forced to hunt, and it's forced to kill. And so I think when you mix that type of fish with people fishing and, you know, the amount of fishing pressure that Chickamauga gets, at some point or another, people are going to start running into 12 and 13 and 14 pound fish. And, you know, that's when you get into those 13ers. Yeah, they're there.
Snake, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's like any big deer or any alpha top level predator in the world. I mean, basically that fish, when it's forced to eat, when it's forced to do something, it's going to make some rational decisions that it's like, I should have swiped at that. Oh, wait. You know?
And that's the thing, you know, that goes back to basic biology with bass too. You know, what they think is like when a bass is extremely cold, they can't see as well, for one. So, you know, their senses are dulled. A lot of times they're displaced. You know, a lot of these fish are resident fish that like to live in creeks, major creeks over here. They like to live in that 12-foot, you know, 9 to 12-foot range. All these fish get displaced to the main part of the river, the only place that's not iced over. And it is amazing how ferocious they are when they bite. Like it's like some of the most crazy, like summertime, nighttime spinnerbait bites.
Wow.
It is ungodly. It feels like they've got a ball bat down there. They just crush it. And they chase. My gosh, dude, I've been reeling stuff in fast to make another cast, like burning it as fast as possible. And, you know, the water's 37 and I'm casting into ice. I've got every layer of clothes on, and they'll like run down, you know, something I'm burning with a 7 gear ratio reel and just crush it at my feet.
You know, it's fascinating. I talked to a biologist on my live stream. It's been a couple of weeks ago now. And I asked him, just out of curiosity, because, you know, bass fishermen, and this is kind of going off on another tangent, but we'll get back to the main topic eventually.
I got a better rabbit.
I got a better rabbit hole to go down here now. But anyway, so I asked him, I was like, you know, in your opinion, and this is a fish biologist and a fisheries biologist, in your opinion, I said, what's the single biggest driving factor of bass? I said, of any predatory fish. And I said, but bass more specifically. He said, it's really, really simple. He said, it's the food. And that kind of goes back to what Adam was saying, like they're forced to eat. And like if a bass is forced to intake calories, then he's going to be put in vulnerable situations where it's going to screw up. And like, like Caleb said, if they're put in a vulnerable situation where they're forced to eat and they can't really see what's going on super well, that's when it's the recipe for disaster for the bass, to put itself in a vulnerable situation where we can get it to screw up. I mean, like Bailey, you
all
saw
in the same location too.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And like
you're on
Bailey saw
lake, all down there at the deepest spot. If you're on the river, they're all at the channel out of the current. So it takes every fish that you want to catch, it puts it into a confined space, and then it dulls their senses. They're in a new area. They have to eat, and then you're bringing a bait by them. It's the perfect storm for a bass fisherman, which is why you see record weights, you see lake records being broken.
Yep.
You see, I mean, it happens. And that's why, like, if I had all the money in the world, and I told Mikey this, I told Alex this, Ben this, if I had all the money in the world and I could just fish whenever I wanted to, I would literally follow the roughest cold weather.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And you would have the best chance to catch, the biggest fish that lives in that body of water or in that region.
And to kind of like take us back to the fall fishing side of things, I think this plays right into fall fishing, and why you do have a chance of catching big ones is because fall is a very turbulent time.
Yeah.
At least here, I know for you guys up there, it's kind of like you got fall and then it just drops right off into winter. Well, down here in the South, it's like fall, winter, summer, summer, fall, winter, fall, summer, summer. 2 weeks of hurricanes coming up from the coast, muddy water, clear water, freezing cold, snow,
high water, low water.
High water, low water. And I think when, you put like all that turbulent water, it can make it super tough, but it also, again, puts bass in vulnerable situations because they get that instinct, that instinctual drive to go eat and self-preservation and, food and those kinds of things. And I think sometimes that's why the fall, you have all this turbulence and then you hit one stable day in the fall. That one stable day is the day that you can just go wreck their face in, and that, or like, it may be stable in the fact that it's cloudy all day or it's raining all day and it's not some crazy turbulent up and down, just anything stable in the fall. It seems those are the days that you go catch the big ones. And I think it's just kind of what Caleb's saying is that it's like opposite to the spring, it's usually in the spring, it's how crazy can it be, or late winter, early spring. But in the fall, it's like all the craziness, you want to find that one stable day. That stable day is the day that the bigs come out and they want to come play. You know what I mean?
For me, it's like, I got on a bite the other day down at the river where 3 days straight, I was going for like 2 hours in the afternoon and catching anywhere between 20 and 22 pounds of brownfish down there. And just like giants, every one that I was catching was a big one. Caught one almost 6 down there on a jerk bait. And the thing was, it was like super turbulent conditions, right? And we had a bunch of water that was running out of the dams. But the key there was that they ran the same current for about 3 days in a row. And so what it did is it allowed those fish to position in one little seam, and I was able to capitalize on that area. And so for those 3 days after they had already gotten there, I smashed them. And I think that's one of the big things with spring or fall fishing, why it's so good and it's perceived to be so good, is motion. Like, these fish are in motion. They're migrating with bait. In the springtime, they're migrating up for spawning. But when you put big fish, especially on pressured bodies of water like we have here, when you put big fish in motion, they're vulnerable because they're not sitting at a spot like in the summertime. They sit on those ledges, for 2 or 3 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not moving. They see a million baits go over their head. It's really hard to fool a fish like that unless you've got something that's going to throw them off their game. Whereas in the fall or in the spring, when those fish are in motion, they're hitting stopping points. So that fish might not have been there for more than a few hours. It's in a new area. It finds a spot to hunker down for a second, and then all of a sudden you bring a presentation across that fish in a new area. And I think that's one of the major things that throws them off their game. So a combination of, difference in weather. So you get cloudy days, sunny days, rainy days, blah, 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 right? And then you have different currents, different water levels, fish moving. Like, to me, the more factors that you can throw towards that fish, the better chance that you have of catching one that's, that 9-10 pound class fish for largemouth and that 6 to 7 pound class fish on smallmouth. Because in reality down here, these fish get beat up so much. I mean, you've seen, Bailey, the pressure that we get down here. It's like you have to throw as many odds in your favor. It's like that day that you and Alex and I were out and catching those giant fish on live bait.
Alex was.
Because it was just yeah, exactly.
That was a one-sided wreck test right there. I'm sorry, y'all.
But it was nasty out there. You know what I mean? Like it was like super nasty weather conditions. The current was ripping through there, and it just throws those fish off their game just a little bit more. It gives you those chances.
Yep.
Yeah, and so this is interesting. And Adam, I'm going to be really curious to see how it is out your way in Colorado. So, like Alex, you mentioned how you look for those stable days to really capitalize. For us in the north, and I can't really speak for everybody, but what I've found is you fish after that first big cold front that rolls through. You always like your better days are, especially for smallmouth, are when there's falling temperatures. When you have a 38, a 32 or a 28 or something like that morning, you are going to wreck their facing because it's that instinct, right? I mean, Caleb, we talked about it gets things going in motion where those fish can feel that. It's a pressure job, and they're like, hey, winter's coming. You got to start eating now because before we know it's going to be too cold and I'm going to have my butt planted on the bottom, not doing anything. Yeah. So it's kind of like they kind of feel that it gets their instincts in motion, and you're literally just going to eat everything that's in front of their face. So it's one of those things where it's almost you fish the drops is kind of like one of the points I have here. It's like you'll catch fish all throughout the fall, but I think some of your best days where you're like, you're going to double up a bunch on like an A-rig type of deal is on those days when it's the drops in temperature and pressure.
That's really funny because for us over here, we have such swings in weather that we get a lot of false falls. I know Alex knows what I'm talking about. We'll get a legit cold front that'll run through for 3 or 4 days, and then it's back like daggum summer again, then it's cold again in the summer again. So our fish, they don't subscribe to that at all. Like when the first few cold fronts that run through, I mean, you can't tell a difference on our fish at all. It's when it becomes stable. Whenever we have prolonged cold, when you get it for 2 weeks or so and it's starting to drop and those days are getting shorter, that's when we see it. Like and we see it, our legit fall bite is weeks away.
November. Yeah. Like end of November.
It's like right now for us, it's, you go out there and you grind during the day in grass. You're going to throw a frog. You're going to punch. You're going to catch some big ones. You're going to fish main lake isolated mats and stuff. And you're going to run to the back of the pocket right before dark, look around for a little bit of activity and smash their face in for an hour because it's an afternoon bite until November. Then it turns into a morning bite. And that's when you get those prolonged feeds where it's like from daylight until whenever. Sometimes if it's like bluebird skies, it might tail off at 11, 12 o'clock. But if it's cloudy out there, it might be an all day just feedback going on. It's funny because we're just way behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny. Like this is one big tip I can give anybody fall fishing. And I'm sure it's similar up north and out west where you're at in Colorado. But like, if you get a bite in an area, make several more casts into that area. Like so many people fall fishing are like,
I know.
I caught one, and then they
roll
keep
them over
going
on
down
10,
the bank.
still going.
I'm like, whoa, slow down there, Captain. Like, throw back into that area because that's one thing our fish definitely start doing is like, a few weeks ago I got on a bite when I was in the kayak, and like I found like 8 in one area. It was 8 bites in one isolated area. So I caught those 8 fish, sat there for probably an hour or more, and didn't get another bite. I think I caught one more fish out of that area, so like 9 total bites. Well, 2 more weeks from now, that could be 15 total bites. And then 2 more weeks from there, it could be 30 total bites. And then, when we get down in the end of the November, that's one of those areas where you go and sit like me and Caleb have before in one place for 2 hours and never not get a bite. Yeah, I mean, as long as you want, because there's 150 fish sitting there. You know what I mean? And or they were sitting there, and it's just that weather has made them start eating, and like Caleb was saying, that false fall, it happens all the time here. Like the other day we had one, it was like, I woke up and it was like 38 degrees outside. And like the high that day was 52. Is gorgeous outside. And like, it kind of affected the fish. You had a few that wanted to eat, but like, then the next day it was 95 again. And so that's an anecdotal experience for us, right? I mean, like that's something that I think the South like southeastern United States, we experience a lot of that just because of the way it's set up here. But like, what's Colorado like, man? Like, I heard you live in Colorado. It's like, what is Colorado bass fishing? Like, what is that like, dude?
Okay, so Colorado bass fishing specifically is like Ohio bass fishing. Like, it is like small fish, right? But then we travel a lot, and where I'm at, right, like I either have to go east and get to fish, like I fished the Central Toyota Series this year, so I fished Grand and those kinds of places, or I go west and I go to Havasu and have gone to Clear Lake and those kind of, and Lake Mead, those kinds of situations. So I'm in the middle of nowhere. The trick is, like, there is some really good fishing in our smaller lakes because we don't have very much water, right? And also, if you go into Nebraska, I'm in northern Colorado, so if you just go a little bit east, I mean, dude, like there's some fishing that I would argue, like tournaments. We just fished one in, I mean, we're talking first, or I guess it was the second week of September. Terrible time of year for most places in the country. Right? I mean, 16, 18-pound bags. I mean, like, and in July, I've had a 20-pound bag there. Like in July, which is not a good time. And they're all northern strain, largemouth, and they're smallmouth in that place. But like, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing because it's similar to like the Ozark region of fishing, and then you get kind of like our Pueblo Reservoir, which is one of our big tournament lakes. Like, it's very similar to a Havasu, a Mead, Clearwater, Desert Lake. Small fish in it. I mean, it's got like if you catch in the spring, you catch a 13, 14-pound bag, you're really catching them. Like, I've seen 1 or 2 15-pound bags there. I mean, in this time of the year, it's like going to take 10 or 9. Right.
Wow.
But what's cool about that lake is there's smallmouth spots and largemouth in it. And so kind of going along with fall fishing, like that's a place where I've done a lot of fall fishing. It's where we have a lot of kind of tournaments as we get to this time of the year. And going off of what you're saying, Rudd, as far as like throwing back if one's there, it's like, to me, fall fishing is very much right. They're on the bait, they're following the bait, and there's a lot of dead water. Like, there's spots like, man, why did I always catch one here? And it's like, well, they're not there. You go 2 coves over and you get bit. It's like, better stick around and throw a couple more casts because they're all there. Like, that's in those wads. So to me, it's more about finding a few key areas from a tournament's perspective anyway, of like, all right, I need to find where these fish are specifically. And another thing that I love about the fall is the randomness of a big bite on something. I mean, just paying attention to your surroundings, right? And having those fish mess up. But like, I mean, you've been going down the bank and doing something, and you hear them go off, and you look over and you're like, oh no, those are good ones. And you throw top water over there, and you can stick a giant. It could change your day. I mean, it's
any second.
That's any second.
It's a cool time of the year. But.
Yeah, dude. And that's what kind of I was saying. It's like any swing's a big one. And like kind of going off what you say, like paying attention to what's going on around you. And that's huge, not only for like those random topwater bites, but for like bank composition, bottom composition, things that they're on. Because I've noticed in the fall, unlike every other time of year, like they get really specific as to what they want to be on. And I don't know why that is. I don't know what instinctual drive that's fulfilling for them to do that. But like, if you get a bite on wood, you better start breaking down every piece of wood that you run into, because there may be something to that. Or if you get a bite, like the other day for, me and my dad went out for a few hours. It was man-made stuff, like anything man-made, like a wall, like a sea wall, or any kind of thing that stuck out in the water, but it had to be man-made. Like if it was like a lay down, they didn't give a crap about it. Cool. Yeah. If it was a lay down, they didn't give a crap about it. It had to be something man-made. And it was just, I think it was a lot of different factors, but that was something like I said in the video that I made. I was like, pay attention to that bite. Like when you get it, make several casts there, and then also like take a note in your brain as to why that fish might have been sitting there, and then go try to replicate that. Because just like Adam said, like running a few key areas. I know there's one lake near me. It's called Mountain Hill. Little bitty, like in between lake. It's in between 2 bigger lakes, and it's just kind of a river system. And like this time of year, it is literally about going and running 25 different spots as fast as you can.
Mhm.
And like when you get that bite, go, okay, we're coming back here in just a minute, but I gotta go run these other 62 spots real quick. And like then you go back to those areas where you got bites, because out of the 25 spots you'll run, there'll be 4 that are the most productive. And out of those 4, there's 2 where the big ones are at.
Yeah.
And then that's where you can go really in a tournament, situation. That's where you can really capitalize on actually being able to do well in a tournament situation. And then if you're fun fishing, I mean, hell, you just go smack them in the face when you find them. So,
Yeah. And so you mentioned the wood, and that's a really good point, is to, and I think a lot of people have said that, in the fall when things are starting to cool down, as you find specific pieces of structure. I think, you said man-made. It's almost like keying in on objects that retain heat. So like in your guys' zone, something Caleb taught me in the past was cheese mats, especially when things are getting colder, is you find the cheese. I mean, Lee Livesey, one Chickamauga, did the same thing, throwing a frog over cheese mats. And I can't remember, I think it was October when they had that tournament there. It was the fall, and it's because it retained heat. And that's basically the point. It's like you could punch through them, frog them, whatever. Just find whatever remaining heat sources. So like you mentioned, to keep an eye out, like Adam mentioned, for just random fish going off right next to you. Noticing these little key subtleties, and that could be as simple as a half temperature change, because it might not seem like a big difference in number wise, but like you got to think about it, like even when you're swimming in a pool and there's a slight temperature change, you notice it. It's extremely noticeable. The fish probably feel the same thing, and that's probably where they'll obviously relate to. Is there anything you guys have to add on there?
No, I mean, I agree. Cheese mats. Cheese mats and a frog. I mean, if we can do that 365, can we just do that? Like, can we just like eliminate everything else? Can I tie on a square bill and a frog, and can we go do those 2 things and screw the rest of it? That's what I want.
I'll give you some really good tips here, especially if you're a tournament guy. One, in the fall, learn how to go into community hole areas. Learn how to find the largest population of fish. The largest population of fish in an area is a lot of times a community hole. So what you want to learn how to do is sit there, beat your head against the wall until you can catch those fish in that area. It's different every school, but learn how to catch those fish in that area better than 90% of everyone else who's fishing that spot, because you can weed through all those numbers of fish and end up with a 20-pound bag on 90% of these big community holes on these right kind of lakes. Number 2 is don't get caught up on one type of bait. Because in the fall, the fish are after bait, but it could be crawfish. We just had a full moon. There's a crawfish molt that went on, and a lot of times that bite will trail off for a while. So you're going to want to be over there checking stuff, that flipping bite, that bite on little rock walls and stuff, close to where those shad were, because those fish were on the shad, right? They were on threadfin. So where are they going to go to get on that crawfish molt? The next closest area. There's going to be isolated grass mats along with rock. Or there's going to be isolated grass mats along with wood, hard bottom. That's where your crawfish are going to be. Those fish will slide right over there. You'll lose them for 3 or 4 or 5 days sometimes. And that's what they did. They went over there and ate crawfish for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and you missed out on the best jig bite of your life. So it's like you got to keep them honest every time. Think about size of bait. So over here, predominantly for our bait fish,
huge.
Threadfin and gizzard shad. Those fish, a lot of times, you'll find the right fish are on gizzard shad way on the backside of a flat, on a secondary channel or a cut. You've been chasing all these fish that are hard to catch, that are eating threadfin, mixed in with a million 1-pounders and 2-pounders, when you could have just gone and fished for, 5 to 7-pounders that were eating these gizzard shad over here and capitalize on that bite. Bluegill is a huge thing. Adolescent bluegill get in these creeks where these fish are schooling on threadfin. You know what they do in the day? They go to wood, again, because of that radiant heat. Guess what's around every one of those stumps when you get close to clouds of bluegill? They're that long. They just sit there and slurp bluegill all day.
Fun fact, talking about the biologists again, and we've gone off on like 52 rabbit holes here. I love it. Here's the problem. You get me and Caleb on here, and we live literally in one of the toughest places in the world to go fishing. And so like we have, if there is a thought to be had about it, we've probably thought about it, and we've probably tried it at some point or the other. I mean, dude, outside of like balling up poop and putting it on hooks, I'm sure me and Caleb have done about everything to try to catch it. Yeah, I know, right? You haven't tried that? But anyway, Anyway, so I talked to the biologist again on the podcast, and the last podcast I did with the biologist, probably one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had with him. I've had some pretty fascinating conversations with this guy, but one thing that he was talking about, and this is just something to keep in mind for everybody. It doesn't matter, I guess, anytime you're fishing, but fall specifically. He said that they have done studies that have shown that bass can differentiate the different type of bait that they want to eat based on its smell, and that a bass, based on instinct, can smell baits that are of more caloric value to them than something else.
Wow.
And so, like, if you're talking about a bass that's keying in on bluegill, or like Caleb said, making a move from one food source to another, it may be doing that based on an instinctual drive, knowing that that food source is more available to them or easier to eat. Like a bass is going to choose to eat a crawfish, 10 times over a shad in some scenarios, because they don't have to work as hard for
it. You're not going to chase
like,
the shad in open water if there's a bunch of soft crawfish all around the
exactly,
stump.
Exactly. And so, like, Caleb's right in the fact that during fall fishing, be willing to mix it up a whole lot, but just keep in mind, what is the most caloric, valuable thing in my lake to a bass. Us down here in Tennessee, we've got crawdads and threadfins and alewives and bluegills and gizzard. I mean, we got golden shiners. I mean, we got baby birds, frogs. I mean, there's everything down here. Whereas, like, when you start getting up north, my time that I've spent up north, in Michigan specifically, I've noticed that there isn't that much of an abundance of different food types, but the food types that they have, there's not the variation, but the food types that they have are extremely calorically dense, like your gobies and your perch. And so, like, if you find the gobies or you find the perch, then you find that food, then you found the fish. And like, Adam, I don't know what it's like over in Colorado, those lakes that you're fishing and stuff like that. But I mean, like, it's that similar kind of thought process. And I think a lot of people, yeah, go ahead, Adam.
No, you're good. No, it's the same, man. I mean, we've got very similar situations. Just the biggest thing is our bait fish are generally, because we have that colder period, we don't get the big gizzards. We have small bait fish. Everything gets really, really small, obviously, in the fall too. But we're looking for the easiest meal that's got the most calories.
Yeah, but exactly.
And that makes sense to us, because I mean, think about it. How many times have you been throwing a bait out and sight fishing one that comes up to come eat it, and as soon as it gets nose to plastic, turns right away?
Yep.
I mean, if that scent not right for that specific fish and how it's feeding, I mean, that makes perfect sense in my mind.
Yeah, and that was something that kind of blew my mind when he said that. I was like, I forgot what the context of the conversation was, but I was like, I think I phrased the question as, outside of obviously just the food, can bass identify what they're eating, or is it just all opportunistic? And he said, no, absolutely they can. We've seen that they can smell the difference in between bait. And I was like, hold up, time out, what? Like, because it was that, I mean, as soon as he said that, I thought, like, everything that I do then needs to have some kind of scent on it. Even if it's a reaction style bait, like a crankbait, obviously not. I mean, they're just reacting to it, right?
Yeah.
But like anything that moves any slower than a crankbait, like, you almost want to have that scent on there, because if that is true, then they can track that scent down and they can react to it. You know what I mean? So, Dirds. But
hey, cool story about Dirds. Like, talking about the scent thing, he was telling me a story. This has been months ago, but like, we debate all the time, like the max scent thing. I didn't think it made much of a difference, if any, before. But then Dirds was telling me he was literally fishing a lake and he was like sight casting a drop shot to smallmouth that were ultra spooky. He like cast this drop shot over to this smallmouth. It comes over, looks at the bait, no interest whatsoever, cruises on, but it gets down current of that max scent on the drop shot, and literally comes straight back over to it and eats it.
Wow.
He literally smelled that stupid max scent on there and came around and ate that thing.
Yeah. I wonder just, obviously we're on a rabbit hole again, but I wonder how much, like, for a long time, I thought scent was bull crap.
I did too.
And I think for me, it was because the way I like to fish. I mean, I'm a power fisherman. I like to flip. I like to frog. I like to throw a crankbait. I mean, that's the stuff I like to do. And in those situations, I mean, bass are reacting to things. Even a flip and bite. You know, you flip a jig in there, before that thing hits the bottom, usually they've got a hold of it.
It could be anything.
It can be, I mean, as long as it is in its vicinity and it flashes by its eye, it's going to try to kill it.
Yeah.
But then I started getting into more finesse fishing. I actually bought more than one spinning rod. But like I got more into finesse fishing, and I started to notice like the more that I used scent, the more bites that I got, and the more I would perform better on the water, you know, as far as getting bites around people and, you know, on pressured. And dude, I don't know, man, the scent thing for a long time for me, I thought this is total bullshit. It's not real. And then I started to change my mind. The more I fished with it, the more I talked to people a heck of a lot smarter than me about fishing and like the actual science behind fishing. And then I thought, you know what? You know, if a salmon can smell out the river that it came from and swim 1,600 miles based on scent in the moon, then I bet a bass is advanced enough to probably smell the crawdad that it's eating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's been a few cases where I've seen the effectiveness of MaxScent, and there's one that really stands out, and it was my buddy and I fishing on Lake Ontario, and he's got live scope, and he's in the back of the boat fumbling trying to get a new bait out, and I wasn't using MaxScent at the time, and I pan over and I see one on live scope. I pitch to it, it's coming towards it, and at this time he's coming back up and pitches out. This bait, I watched this fish come to my bait. And as his comes down behind it, it turns around and goes and eats his. And it was a 6-pounder.
Oh,
I was like, so literally you just stole that fish from me. But if that wasn't like a clear case of like, dude, you're just not using the right thing, then I was just like, okay, I'm going to put this down.
I got to say, like, as much as I hate to do it, I'll have to eat crow and say that the MaxScent does make a difference. I mean, it makes a huge difference. I had no idea. Especially
in brownfish, man. I mean, it's crazy. The smallmouth and any current situation, I completely agree. But it's just the thing with fishing, right? And I'm still probably, I believe in scent, but I'm still probably more along the lines of how you guys used to be. And I'm just like, come on, right? Like, especially every reaction situation. But like on the St. Lawrence this year, I went and fished that as a co with Bailey. And man, like some of the biggest fish I caught in practice didn't have scent. Right. It was like a Senko, right? Like a whack rig Senko on a drop shot. So then it's frustrating because you think like that. But really, I think all of fishing comes down to putting the odds more in your favor.
Exactly.
Scent is going to give you one extra bite or every 5 fish or 20% more bites. That's the difference. And that's what I think people get hung up with, including myself on scent, is that it's just that little extra additional couple bites.
Yeah, people see it portrayed as like this massive difference, right? Like night and day, when it's just a couple extra advantages in your arsenal.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens when you fish as long as I guess we all have, right? You know, Adam, I don't know how long you've been fishing, but I know me and Caleb, I mean, like literally our entire lives, it's all we've ever done.
Same.
And it's like you get to the point where it's like you almost, I don't know, it's spoiled is the word, because like you know, you've caught so many fish and you've done so much that then you just start like really toying with those extra few little things. Like, I guess it's less like any athlete, you know, in their profession, you know, a UFC fighter, you know, they want to learn that one extra, you know, chokehold, or they want to learn that one extra arm bar, that one extra technique that in that, you know, championship level fight can make the difference. And for us, you know, for me, I know, you know, I'm not a huge tournament fisherman. I fish a kayak tournament here or there, and obviously got fish out of my boat and stuff like that. But like for me, it's like a hunting. You know, I'm past the point in my fishing, you know, journey where I want to catch a lot of fish. Now I'm like, let's go try to catch fish in this specific situation, and or go try to figure out something no one else has figured out, or let's go try to catch the biggest, you know, just monstrosity in the lake that we can. And I think it's wild though. I mean, that's what I love about fishing. It's very anecdotal. Everybody has a very different anecdotal experience within the fishing world. And I think that's what makes everybody's, you know, opinion so valuable, is that like that old man with a cigarette, you know, almost burned down to the filter out there dragging a peanut jig on a spinner rod has just as much input and value as the dude who's got the $90,000 bass boat and who's fishing, every conceivable tournament that he can fish. It's just very anecdotal, very different opinions, but both very valuable in what they can provide to you in your angling journey.
And that's where I've kind of gone with my angling journey, is just as analytical as I can possibly be, just to, again, Alex mentioned it before, just the competition that we have down here, and these fish, they evolve. That's how they learn, is generation to generation. So when you're giving them that much info and you're pushing from generation to generation, there's things that worked 5 years ago that don't work anymore. I mean, they just don't. And so you have to constantly change with the time. So it's like what happened in California, I feel like, is what is happening here now. Like all these guys in California, they push the envelope way faster than everyone else. And now we've got so much pressure over here in the Southeast that it's the same thing. And in places like Texas and Florida, these anglers are becoming super innovative and, thinking outside the box. And that's what you really have to do if you want to stay ahead of things and be super successful out there.
Yep. I mean, heck, what were we talking about right before we went live? Buying JDM plated jigs. We're getting weird out here, boys. We're getting weird. Yeah.
And that's one thing in the fall time and all year round. It's like that's caught on this year. And it's the last couple of years in like the Bassmaster tournaments and stuff, I've been preaching throwing the jerkbait year round for years. And now it's like everyone's caught on to this with like the live scope thing. It's like you can catch fish on a jerkbait. Like there's certain things, when you're talking about like the power of certain fishing lures, things that have hang time have extreme power. That's why glide baits are amazing big fish catchers. That's why jerk baits are amazing big fish catchers. And why drop shots are amazing big fish catchers. You got something that can hang in the strike zone and you can leave there and it can stay in that area for too long in that fish's zone. It's a good way to catch a big one. And you know what I do in the fall, that float and fly thing. I mean, that would work for you, Adam, too. Like up there.
Dude,
like you find fish schooling back there, throw a float and fly on them, you'll catch.
Really?
You'll catch any fish out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've like messed with that. I guess in the spring one time, in an early spring tournament where it was really cold, like kind of just after ice off, and I got like 3 bites doing it. One of them was a crappie, and I did catch 2 small bass on it, but I was lost. It was very frustrating, but I'd like to.
You need to message me and we'll talk about it, because I throw it when it's like 90 degrees outside and I can sit right around 100 boats and catch as many fish as I want. Wow. So give me a ring on that, and you'll win some tournaments over there on those clear lakes like that, because nobody does it. You can just do crappie fishing to win as many tournaments as you want.
Yeah, Adam,
I like that.
Caleb waxed me in the boat. I had a jerkbait and he had that float and fly on, and he waxed me with that thing. And I was pretty sold on it then, but I wasn't completely sold on it yet until you went up to St. Clair and caught giants during the tough time of year on that. And I was like, okay, I got to learn this freaking thing. It's legit.
It's nasty.
But I mean, so you bring up that live scope, and this actually is probably the answer to this question here, but I'm curious what your guys' thoughts might be from James Sumrell on any tips on catching suspended fish. And he's complimenting your shirt, Caleb.
Live scope.
Yeah, exactly. Live scope.
This buy live scope. No.
That's Chris' son too, right there.
Yeah.
The Bass Attitude, like the shirts and stuff that I wear. They just got the active target from Lawrence not too long ago and been playing with it. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, and I know Alex, you and I talked about this when we go with Ben, is moving and not getting locked onto certain fish. Like you'll see a million fish on a live scope, but you have to figure out like which ones are active. So you're constantly moving. You need to learn what that fish looks like on that graph when it's a catchable fish.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know how big that fish is also. Learn how to differentiate the size of the fish and learn how to read that fish's body language on that graph and know right then, is that a catchable fish or not a catchable fish?
Mm-hmm.
That's like super important.
And I'll say, from somebody who is yet to invest in forward-facing sonar, and this is coming from like someone who's like old at heart, like I'm an old soul, and so like I do old school things. You know what I mean? Is like fall fishing specifically, and like suspended fish. One of my favorite things to do is find vertical cover and vertical structure. And what I mean by that is like more straight up and down cover and structure that those fish can suspend on. One of my favorite things being like a bluff wall, and fishing a crankbait on that bluff wall and stuff like that, and or throwing a spinnerbait on that bluff wall, and just kind of figuring out where depth range those fish are living at. And I mean, it sounds like it can take forever, and sometimes it does, but that's like an old school method of catching them that I just don't see a lot of people doing. And I can capitalize on it every single fall and winter, is to take something like a 3XD or a rock crawler or a seeker, the new monster bass bait, or whatever your favorite medium diving crankbait is, and go cranking those bluff walls and catch fish, and big fish at that are suspended. And I think it's such a valuable piece of cover and structure. And Adam, I don't know how your lakes are out there, but over here we've got everything's dam driven, and so like they jerk the lakes up and down so quick, and the bluffs are always so consistent because that fish doesn't have to move out. Like it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to swim 50 yards in any direction. It literally just goes up with the water and down with the water. And that's why I tell people, like, focus on that vertical cover when you're looking for those suspended fish, because that's where they live. Like if they live on a bluff wall, they're suspending their whole life. And then just throw something, jerk bait, crankbait, spinner bait, spy baits, even something, a rig. Yes. And and just go crack their ass. I mean, because it's just, that's where the big ones live, and you can go have fun doing it. And dude, like the a rig, it's such a, for me, I overlook it now. I think because so many people have thrown it around. I mean, dude, God, like I cannot tell you every. I mean, dude, yes, it's like around 3 out there with A-rigs flying around your head. Like everybody's got them. And then too, like I don't know what in Colorado. I don't know what it's like, but like I know, where was it? I told somebody to throw an A-rig, and I almost got them in trouble because like they went and rigged it. Yeah, they went and rigged up 3 hooks on their A-rig and like got pulled over by the DNR like immediately. Wow. And well, I saw it on YouTube, and the dude was like, "Well, don't listen to YouTube." I was like, "Yeah, don't listen to me. Like, check the law first." Like, so I preface every A-rig conversation with, make sure to check the laws in your state before you go and do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
I know for sure.
But you're dead on the bluff walls, like especially that reservoir I'm talking about, Pueblo. We had a TBF semi-national there last year that I qualified for, and I ended up taking second in it. And I almost won it on the bluffs completely. That's all I was doing. All these other guys, like what I had found was I found this area, again, like 3 coves next to each other. Only one of them had fish in it. One of them had activity. One of them had bait busting, small bait. Yeah. And a couple other guys had found it, and they were fishing the bait out in the middle, and these fish chasing. And every fish I caught out there was small, and I the big ones were either beneath those fish or they were on the bluff, and no one was hitting the bluff next to it. And dude, those fish on the bluff were insane. I mean, I went down that bluff, and then that's what my pattern was. I turned around, I was like, look, I told my coach, I'm like, look, man, it's going to be kind of a tough day. Hopefully we can figure something out where after I get my limit, we can switch things up, or you can throw a Carolina rig behind me, but I'm going parallel, dude. I'm running these bluffs, and it was that situation. Those fish were just sitting on the shade, especially in the fall, I think can play a big role, is in the shade situations, and they were just waiting for one group of shad to swing by them and come out and eat it. And so I was catching them on a lot of different things. Cranking, though, was one of those things. Yeah. Rig, swim bait. I mean, it was just a matter of really getting down to the smaller size bait fish too. I think a lot of guys didn't realize how small that bait they were chasing was. It was tiny.
Yeah. So is that something that you deal with a lot? Because I know here on certain lakes, dude, we get those like glass minnows. Like they're just like the tiniest little bait. And it seems like for some reason, I talked earlier about like bass keying on calorically high like things, but like the bass will get keyed in on. Yeah. Why are you swimming around trying to kill that thing? Like there's a whole pot of bluegill in the back of this pocket. Go eat that. Like, why are you out here trying to chase these? But dude, like those little bitty bait, like that is some of the hardest crap to try to mimic. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know. I know for me, and I want your opinion on this, Adam. I'd love to know. Like, for me, I almost go to the opposite. Like I go with like a whopper plopper or something. It's just something that throws a lot of water, and it makes it. I don't know if it's in my mind, I think this, or if it actually does it. But like with a whopper plopper, it throws a lot of water, and it almost looks like a lot of little bait.
I see what you're saying. I like it.
Yeah. And like, I've noticed that like when they're on that stuff, that getting them to come up and commit on something like on top or right subsurface, you know what I mean, something small and some like a spy bait or like a small swim bait or something like that is really the only way I can get them to eat. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't know, it's crazy, dude. I mean, I've seen like the other day is a great example of this. I went down a bluff with a fluke. And I thought, dude, this is it. Like, they're going to crack this fluke because there's a bunch of bait on this bluff. Dude, they'd swim out behind it and look at it. And then, like, you would see the cloud of bait move behind them, and they just U-turn and go for the cloud of bait. Yeah. And I'm like, why are you not eating the 5-inch fluke? Like, eat it. You know what I mean?
So, I spent a lot of time, like, observing those fish schooling on tiny, tiny bait. There's one area around here that I fish a lot is, you know, that Paradise Cove right across from Chester Frost. And like you see these tiny bait, and what happens is these white bass get on there and they push these bait all the way to the surface, and it's almost like you see those whales that come up and eat herring and stuff, like they blow the bubbles and they come up. It's like they use the white bass to corral these little shad into little tight bundles, and they'll be like little tight bundles, and you'll see 8 and 10 pound bass like right next to the boat come up, and they'll just get a mouthful of all those shad and go back down. And that's the thing, you can't mimic that. And so like right at dark, I can throw a rig in there and catch one random big one. But the main thing that I figured out with those kind of schooling fish, when they're on that tiny bait, you don't want to catch those fish when they're up. You'll never catch the big one when they're up. You got to figure out where are those fish sitting to ambush before they go up and you see them schooling. It's usually close by, but it's not directly below that spot. Look on your graph, find that hard bottom that's within 15 yards of that area. That's where those fish stage at before they come up and feed. If you can figure out how to catch those fish when they're staging down there, that's how you catch the big ones every time. And it's usually something finessey, you know, again, what I was talking about before, my bobber rig and stuff. It's just like you can catch all those fish like that, but And what you were talking about, Adam, with the bluff wall, it's the same thing. You were fishing for the big fish because they're not dumb. They're not going to be like those little fish and use up all their energy chasing that bait around. They'll let the little fish corral the bait and break them up, and then the little schools of bait, what they do, they get on that structure like a bluff wall and they parallel it. It gives them something to feel safe against. Those bass just sit right off the edge of it. As soon as they see that pot of bait come by, they got something to ambush it against.
Yep.
And so that's why, you know, you're catching the right fish there. It's thinking outside the box like that. You got to get into that area and then find the spot on the spot every time. Like if I find a fish that's got an area that's got a 300 fish school in it, I don't care anything about that. I want to know what the cast is. What is the cast? And then if you're in a tournament situation, be the guy that gets there first and makes the cast. You don't go chasing, you know, what's going on in front of you. You figure out that area. Where's the biggest fish going to sit? And 9 times out of 10, you can find it. You know, there's an area that it's a couple big rocks at the end of the point where all the fish are sitting. It's one big stump. It's, it's a little point that pops out right there. Where's the big fish at? Go over there. Catch the big fish. And then you can work.
I mean, dude, we've done that so many times together. Yeah. Like we've been on a school of 3 and 4 pounders, and like, dude, it's fun. Like when you're cranking a square bill and you're catching 3 or 4 pounders, you don't complain. But like Caleb's gone, let's cast literally 10 foot to the left because there's just a small divot in the bottom there, and like me and him both double up on 6 pounders. Like, and because that's where that bigger than average fish doesn't want to be with the school. They want to be near the school, but they don't want to be with the school, and they're just slightly off. And like the bluff wall thing, man, I think it's just one of those deals. It's like they still have access to deep water. They still have access to food, but they don't have to be out in the middle of the lake chasing everything. They can chill right there and just eat what is presented to them. And then 2, the crawdad thing, I think is huge. Sometimes I've seen so many crawdads crawling around on those bluffs. Like, you know, you get something hung up and you go over to pop it loose, and like there's 4 crawdads like crawling around, and you're like, oh, so that's why they're sitting here. Like, it's like, you know, when the hamburger's not swimming by, there's popcorn laying on the bank for them to go eat. I mean, it's just like, you know, that's where
it's like I don't fish tournaments that often, but I tell the tournament guys all the time, it's like, go find 30 or 40 spots that you can make 5 casts on. It's a big fish spot. Because if you go fish 30 or 40 of those in a day, guess what? you're going to run into 5 of the right ones.
Absolutely.
You know, you can catch the biggest bag of the tournament by doing that. And that's the thing. Even in the fall, you know, it's so easy to get caught in the mentality to see these fish schooling. And it's like, I had to talk myself out of that. Like, I literally sat in some of these areas that are just beat to death. And I was like, I'm not moving until I find a way to catch these fish that no one else can catch, because I can see them. I know the right fish are here. I'm not moving until I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Community holes are community holes for a reason, man.
Exactly. And some of these community holes around here, like, no one fishes them anymore. Like, they'll pull in there and there's 30 boats in there for the first 10 minutes of the tournament, and then everybody leaves because it sucks that bad.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I completely thought outside the box and was like, okay, get away from the fish that I'm seeing. Like, I know the activity's there. I know the fish are here. Where are they sitting when they're not feeding? Figure that out. 4 or 5 waypoints later, you find that, okay, this is where the fish are sitting. Graph it. Go over it a million times until you're like, okay, this little section, this 5 foot by 5 foot area is white hot on there. It's harder bottom. Even though this is all hard bottom for this 30-yard section, this is the hardest bottom. This has 2 boulders on it. There's no boulders over there. This has a small section of chunk rock or shell. Just anything slightly different like that, especially if it's something small. If it's the size of the hood of your truck, you better dang well mark it and make that cast first, because that's the one that you don't want to mess up on. And you can dial that in to every spot that you fish, especially if you're in spots where there's schooling fish, where you know there's groups of fish. Break it down. Find out where the biggest fish sits, because the big fish, I mean, he's top dog, right? She's top dog. She's going to knock everybody else out of the way, and she's going to sit at the best area to sit.
Yep.
So it's like tournament fishing. When you're out there practicing, as soon as you catch a couple fish on that spot, you're like, okay, I'm not going to touch them anymore. I'm going to leave. First thing you should do, go over there and graph. I mean, run all over them, because you're not going to spook them bad enough to mess them up for the next day. Run all over them until you figure out what is the spot on the spot. You can make that exact lineup, that exact cast, and then figure out different angles on it too. You know, deep to shallow, shallow to deep. Take that fish outside its element. Show the fish something, you know, a bait from a different presentation, different angle than they normally see. And 9 times out of 10, you can fool that fish, and it'll be the right one out of that. You know, you'll be in an area that's got a million 3-pounder schooling, but there's 1 6.5 right there, and you'll come away with the 6.5.
Dude, that's a really good point, because, like, especially in the fall, like Alex made the point earlier, is like, when you catch one, make sure you make that same cast a couple more times, because chances are in the fall, especially when they group together, there's going to be more fish there. And there's people that'll get on those fish, cast, and they're like, oh, it's been 10 casts, haven't caught anything, let's keep moving. When in reality, you could easily just switch colors or a complete different profile, or even just like you mentioned, it's the direction of your cast.
Turn on. You know, it could just be that.
Yeah, it could be a simple rock pile, and you're casting from the south side. You just got to go to the north side and cast. It's a complete change of direction, and then they're fired back.
Keep honest, because once you find fish, the fish are there. 9 times out of 10, they are catchable in some way. It might be tough. It might be a timing deal, but the right fish is there. Once you figure out where the right kind of fishes are, you know, just figure out how to catch them. Like, beat your head against the wall until you figure it out.
Right.
One more thing, Bailey, on what Caleb said. Dude, that is like mind blowing to me, as far as or is going to be something that I'm really going to work on this fall and into next year, because so many times I roll up on a spot in practice and I catch a couple fish or a fish, and then I'm shaking a couple off, and I'm just someone who's always like, man, I don't want to mess with these fish. I want to get out, right? You know what I mean? The first thing to do is pull the trolling motor and go. It's like, well, really, let's take a minute here, and especially in the fall when these fish are grouped up and there isn't much other options, right? You find an area of fish, and it's like, this could be all you need, really, if this is the right school, and find the spot on the spot where that bigger one's going to sit.
And that's the thing, dude. Like, most of these fall fish, they break up at night. That's why it's like, you know, sometimes the first thing in the morning bite doesn't work until later in the fall. Because most of these fall fish, the schools break up completely overnight. And it takes them all day. That's why it's an afternoon bite. It takes them all day to regroup in that area to start that feeding.
Especially Main Lake. I think, you know, like for me, I do a lot of like creek and river fishing. Like I take the old 10 rig up into places that boat's not supposed to go. Like I run that thing like it's a tunnel hole. Yeah, I mean I run that thing like it's a tunnel hole, and it's not a tunnel hole. You know what I mean? Like
kayak I ever seen.
Yeah, I'm telling you something. Like I'm the dude who rolled his 18-foot aluminum boat up onto a stump and was using the power pole to push it off of the stump. Like I'm that guy, right? And so like in those scenarios, Adam was saying like if you are tournament fishing in that scenario and you get a bite or two, you leave, because those are very residential fish. And if you catch them and take them out, it's going to be a long time before more fish decide to move back up into that area or squirrel their way back up. That, in that scenario, I'm looking for something no one else has touched yet. But like when Caleb's talking about and kind of to give context to what Caleb's talking about to everybody listening, we're talking about main lake scenarios where you have big schools of fish. And like, way too many people get caught up on this idea that you're going to spook the school of fish away. You're not. There are fish constantly moving in and out and in and out and in and out. And especially in any kind of riverine system where there's current, there's fish that just get pushed off and they drift down to the next point and stop. And there's 4 more drift into their spot. And I mean, I've been with Caleb and we've seen it where like, you fish and fish and fish and fish and fish and fish and fish, and like you think you've caught them all, and literally you move over 50 yards and make another cast in completely different direction, and like all of a sudden here comes the whole school comes alive again, and it's because they're setting there and there's so many of them and they're reloading. And so I think one thing that people need to understand is like don't be scared to spook them unless you're in a situation where you're fishing for very residential fish, where you're doing things. Yeah, like I like to do, or like a John Cox. Like John Cox does this. That was like when he won his first Forest Wood Cup. That's why he was so worried about that spot, is because he knew that there was only a finite amount of fish that actually lived in there. Yeah. Whereas when you go more main lake or these bluffs like we were talking about earlier, dude, there's so many fish in that. Bailey, bro, we know. Like there's so many fish that live in only one area that it would absolutely blow your mind if you could just drain the lake and see them. They're there.
That's what I'm talking about, is just like if you're going through and you're practicing for a derby, no matter where you're at, catch a couple of those fish, shake them off, whatever. But before you leave, run them over with your side scan and your down scan and just figure that out. You're not going to spook those fish. They're not going to go anywhere. You're going to scatter them right then. I mean, if anything, that's going to help you, because whoever comes back there after that point and practicing, they're going to be, fishing for fish that are scattered. Run them over a couple of times. Figure out exactly where those fish are sitting, like where would the big fish be, and then go on. Because the next day, they're all going to be right back where they were. Yeah. That's not going to hurt them. I mean, there's enough boats running over these fish. They ain't going to care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So this question from Christopher Wilson asking the best way to locate fall fish on a large lake. I think we might all have the same answer here, but I'm still going to put it out to see if you guys have anything different.
Dynamite.
Yeah. Shock
M80s. Just shock them up. Just get the shock boat, start shocking. No.
My answer to that would be have a bunch of rods on deck and be willing to cover as much water as possible until you stumble upon them, pretty much, is basically my answer to that. But I'm very curious if you guys have any other things, any other tips for them. When you go out, maybe it's a new body of water as well, and you're just trying to find fish.
So I'm going to go back to what I referenced a few minutes ago, being the guy who goes up into little creeks and rivers and things and does that kind of fishing, because that's just what I like to do. I go find choke points. I go find places where bass, bait, and current are forced to be choked down into an area. And that could be as simple as a bridge or a tight spot in the creek or a river bend or a creek bend, somewhere where that current and the bait and the fish have to consolidate if there's any kind of movement. And then within that area, once I find that, go find the area that is best for those fish to sit on and be able to ambush whatever's coming to them. And so I know in the fall, that's something I definitely look for. Mouths of creeks are great because it's a consolidation area. You know what I mean? They have to consolidate there. They have to, live in that area and be in that area because it's where the food's at. It's where the food's going to be. It's where the food is coming to. It's where the water, if the water is being dropped down, it's where it's forcing them to go. and Chick is a great example of that. And like the whole Hiwassee River is a great example of that. And Watts Bar is a great example of that because it's a bunch of creeks and creek arms that all feed into this big main river channel, and the colder it gets and the more that water drops, the more them fish are literally forced out of those creeks towards the mouths of the creeks and then eventually into the main river channel. And so if you can start following that progression, you can stay on fish all throughout the fall. And so that's just for me. I mean, like that's coming from somebody who loves water this deep and loves throwing a crankbait and a chatterbait and flipping. Now, big, main lake, as far, that's big lakes. I'm talking, these lakes that I fish, Watts Bar, 70,000 acres. I mean, it's huge. And so I'm just finding a microbiome inside of this giant biome. I'm finding this one situation in a big situation. And so that's just one point of view. Caleb, or Adam, you can kind of give your point of view. That's just something I do.
When you're talking about a big, big body of water, if you're starting fresh, like you're just showing up to a big lake, best thing I can tell you to do is to find an area where you can condense this body of water. So what does this body of water have? If it's a river system, maybe it has grass, maybe it has bluff walls, maybe it has, creek arms and stuff. If it's a highland reservoir, maybe it has, a certain amount of creeks. Well, if you're going to find if you want to know if fish are in the creeks, first thing I do, I find a creek that is a manageable size. And then I can easily find out if those fish are in the first third, second third, or final third of that creek. Mm-hmm. If you go into the biggest creek of the lake, it's a lot harder to break that down. Whereas if you pick one of the smaller ones, you can run up in there and figure that out lickety-split. Same thing with flats. If you're going to go fish a flat, find a flat that necks down. That's one of the smaller flats. That way you can find isolated grass patches, the main grass patches, the inside, channel edge of that, and you can fish those areas fast. And what I also like to do is I like to find areas that have a lot of different, like diverse color or diverse cover and diverse feed, forage for those fish. So it's like I'm going to look on my Google Earth. I'm going to find an area. I'm like, okay, this is a small creek. It's got, a little tributary that runs into it back here. It's got some secondary points on it. It's got grass. It's got this bluff wall over here. And it's got some docks over here. Boom. I can run in there, and within an hour, I can graph and quickly fish that creek and know, hey, there's a bunch of fish on these docks and on these secondary points. Let me go check a big creek. Boom. I'm over there. Same thing. Or I roll up to this flat. And I'm like, I don't know if they're on the inside grass line, outside grass line, if they're on the isolated patches. Boom, I can go in there in an hour. Boom, I know. Okay, they're on the isolated stuff. They're eating a frog. Here we go. And then I'll start running these big flats. And then I'm not just fishing. I'm stopping. I'm big motor, run to the next little patch, 10 casts, big motor, run to the next little patch, 10 casts. And then you're efficient that way. That's the thing. It can be so overwhelming, especially a lot of these guys that come from up north and fish these giant lakes that we've got. Chickamauga is huge. Watts Bar is huge. I mean, Nickajack is huge to most people.
Yeah, it is.
It's wild. And so
it's tiny compared to others.
Down and make it manageable. Spend time with your maps. Break the lake into thirds, break the creeks into thirds. Decide what areas that you're going to start on, and then expound on the patterns from there. Mm-hmm. Make it small, make it manageable, and then expound from there.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Go
yeah, one quick note to add to Christopher's question is, Christopher earlier in the chat was saying how he will be competing in the local kayak trail that I'm in next year. This concept is actually pretty dang hard to get a grasp of, and this is where the difficulty of kayak fishing comes in. And Alex, I know you can relate to this. Is like for fall fishing, like Caleb, going to your point of like being able to bounce areas and fire up your motor, make a couple casts, fire up your motor, make a couple casts. Well, for us, it's make 5 casts, spend 45 minutes pedaling to the next spot, make 5 casts, 45 minutes pedaling to the next spot, make 5 casts. It's a whole different world in kayak fishing, especially fall fishing. You just gotta
that much more important though. So if you're practicing with a kayak on a big lake, first thing I'm going to do is roll up into a smaller area of whatever I think might be the main pattern. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to roll up into that area, and it's something that I can manage to fish as a kayak angler. And then I'm going to get some stop-off points. I'm like, okay, this is the pattern. I was able to figure out in a couple hours. Now, what are the big areas? What are the right areas that have this pattern? Boom, I run through there. Then I can, drive in my truck, make 3 or 4 more stops and figure out, okay, this flat's got them, but this flat has a mat that has like 8-pounders in it. Boom, I'm going to, put my kayak in. I'm going to hit this. And then if all things go bad, then I've got 3 other spots that I can pop out real quick. It's like you can be so efficient.
What's so funny is
thinking way ahead.
What's so funny is like I have 2 methods of kayak fishing. First method is that where I literally run myself ragged within a day and I'm exhausted by the end of the day because I've loaded my Hobie 14 times into the back of my truck and drove the entire circumference of the lake. Like, you know what I mean? Used a whole tank of gas. And or it's that what I was talking about earlier is that like finding those consolidated areas where the current has to consolidate down, which again, it plays right into what Caleb's talking about. It's breaking creeks into thirds, starting the back third and move towards the front. I just do it in an opposite fashion. You know what I mean? Like, so that's, but Caleb's right. I mean, dude, we've done it. I mean, we do it now. That's what I'm working. Literally what I work on every time I go to the lake is like, I have to break this giant area down into thirds and go figure out the third that they are in. And then within that, go to what Caleb was talking about and what Adam was talking about, the spot within the spot. And that's how you start to break down lakes. I mean, that's the process. And I mean, I know for newer anglers, that is such a hard concept to wrap your head around. Mm-hmm. And the best piece of advice that I can give you is spend a ton of time on the water. Spend as every waking moment that you have that you don't have to be at work or you don't have a responsibility to fulfill. Be out there with a rod and a reel in your hand, because the reason Caleb is so good at fishing is because the dude fishes more than I do. You know what I mean? And the reason I'm so good at summer fishing is because I'm a teacher and I have all summer off. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, those are the reasons that we're good at the things that we do and our fishing styles are so different, is because we capitalize on the time that we have, to do what we love, which is fishing, and we do it all the freaking time. That's what makes a pro a good pro. Like, pros who have the ability and financial freedom to go and fish all the time, that's why those guys get so good. It's because they've seen it all. What's that State Farm commercial? We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. That's what those dudes turn into.
I agree completely with that. And the only thing I would add is, like, spend as much time on the water that you can, but always spend quality time out there. In other words, you're always doing your research beforehand. You're doing your homework. Mm-hmm. You're out there on Google Maps. You're over there, looking at lake levels. You're looking at maps. That way you have a general idea and you're constantly expounding on things before you even get out there. Spend good time, especially if you're in a tournament situation, you're on a big lake, a new lake. If you haven't done 12 to 20 hours worth of map study, you've shot yourself in the foot to begin with. Because you can, in 10 hours, you can become as proficient as 80% of the locals as far as having a concept of what's going on that body of water. That way, when you hit that pattern, it'll immediately ring a bell of 3 or 4 other places that you can go in that area to hit. Instead of you getting on a school of fish, you catch 10 out of there and you're like, oh crap, they stopped biting. What do I do now? Mm-hmm. It's like, as soon as you're catching those fish and while you are, you're like, dude, this is this point. It tapers off this way. Like, the creek down from here has the same thing. I cannot wait to go hit that. Mm-hmm. The wind's blowing into it too. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as you're done there, you're over there and you're like, and I remember right over here, there was another one. And so then by doing that, like, if you're spending the time and money and energy to go out there and fish a tournament, if you're not doing that, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you shot yourself in the foot to begin with, because I don't go on any trips to any lake that I haven't spent so much time. Just like, even when Ben and I, like, we're up in Michigan and we'll decide to fish a lake the night before, and this dude's on his phone until 4 a.m, like, looking at every little point, and I've got like 1 million waypoints before
Before we even got on this live stream, I was literally on Google Earth looking at a lake that I have fished more than I have ever. It's like a lake that I fish all the time, but I'm still like on Google Earth just looking, like, constantly. Like, if you see me on my phone at any point and I'm going, like, literally all I'm doing is just looking and dropping pins and then referencing over to Navionics and studying the maps and like looking, because I mean, Caleb's right. I mean, that's one of those things that for new anglers, especially, I think that helps to take a lot of that curve out of the learning curve away.
And so many of these kids, like the high school and college, circuits and stuff, you can tell. I mean, you can tell when these kids get out of the college circuits and like they're hitting into the pros now. It's like these guys are making waves. It's because they got the right kind of electronics, they got the right kind of attitude, they're using technology to help them out. And so they can take, Cole, he fished the lake for 3 years and he knew more about the lake than I did, like my entire life sitting there fishing that lake.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a really good example. A lot of these young kids, they can find everything that I know in 3 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's wild. It's like just spend
technology.
Go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? It's like use every tool in the toolbox, and that's one of the best ones.
And that's when you get old men shaking their fist at clouds because they hate the fact that they're kids that can literally
25 years. This little kid goes up in a bass boat and just starts whacking them right in front of them.
Yeah. It's so fun.
Yeah, your boy Cole got a top 10 at Lake Norman.
That kid's a dang hammer.
Jim, just natural. So they need to call him
natural.
That's what he is.
The boat with him, it's just like he's like a human sane when he goes through. It's like he filters through every single bass that's ahead of you.
Yeah,
and you better be fishing on the opposite side of the boat or wherever he's at.
Just have a Carolina rig dragging it behind the boat because that's the only chances you got.
My bow out and just start trying to shoot stuff.
Yeah, that's where the M80s I was talking about a few minutes ago comes into play.
So, Alex, going back to when we are talking about suspended fishing, finding vertical cover, the question you're asking about top 3 vertical bait.
So, like, does he mean like dropping on them? Because that's a whole different bite within itself.
We were talking about vertical cover, so I think that's what he was referring to.
Yeah, so like bluffs and stuff like this. For me, it's a crankbait, like a small body, medium diving crankbait's like my number one confidence. Like rock crawler 3XD, anything in that, a rock crawler specifically, because Spro did a really good job of making a medium diving crankbait that can get down to 15 foot. So I can effectively fish that, you know what I mean? Then a jerk bait is going to be my other one, especially as it starts to get colder. The power of a jerk bait to draw fish up for me is huge. And then something like an Alabama rig or a spinner bait, something in that kind of realm, is going to be something else. And then like a jig. I mean, like you can effectively fish a jig on a bluff, especially if it's like those kind of stair step bluffs. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've noticed anyway around me. We got a lot of sandstone and limestone. And so that limestone and that sandstone breaks off in like sheets. And so over time, as it erodes away, it doesn't really it breaks off and like creates these stair steps all the way down the bluff. And so like the fish will sit on those kind of, I say stair steps, they're just natural breaks in the rock. Mm-hmm. And you can effectively fish a jig on stuff like that. So that's kind of my top baits.
I think I agree with that. I would add, so your sinking baits, when you're talking about fishing a jig or a swim bait or something like that on a bluff wall, fall rate is incredibly important when you're talking about fishing vertical cover. Do they want it falling fast? Do they want it falling slow? You need to learn, like, with your particular bait, what the pendulum effect is on that bait. That way, if the fish is suspending along that vertical structure, if you know where that fish is, you can actually pendulum your bait and keep it in the strike zone longer. So you can arrest the fall of the bait. You can control the fall rate by the weight of the bait, but you can also arrest the fall in the strike.
Well, Caleb just died.
Uh-oh.
The Russians have attacked. That's it. We're over.
YouTube said they had enough of Bass Quest.
Yeah. No more.
Adam, do you have anything to add to that whole vertical bait conversation?
Yeah, man. Again, just a lot of our lakes, it's clear water bluff walls.
No idea what just happened there.
Oh, yeah. We thought you died.
He's back. It's not the Russians, everybody.
Pendulum, like that effect. You can get that with swim baits. You can get it with jigs, with your creature baits. Like for me, fishing vertical structure, I agree completely with Alex. I love things that can hang, something that can suspend, whether it's a big glide bait, whether it's a jerk bait. And you can actually get your rigs to suspend too by playing with the weight, getting them really light to where when you're reeling that thing slow, it's staying at one level. Same thing with swim baits. But I really like to get on a jig bite where I can get, again, right up against that bluff wall and then pendulum that bait and keep it right in the strike zone. If I know the fish are biting that thing at about 12 foot, I will rest the fall at 9 and let it pendulum back towards me. That way it just stays right around that fish, for a good 8 foot. So I'm fishing like an 8 or 10 foot section of that bluff wall instead of just like dropping, like little prayers here and there.
So Adam, what were you saying about clear? You were saying clear water, man.
Yeah, so like 2 things for me when it comes to bluff wall fishing. I'm either going to be against it, like Rudd's talking about, throwing a crankbait down it, throwing an A-rig down it, jerking down it, that kind of a thing. Or I'm going to do also what you guys are talking about as far as with a jig. I love throwing, especially in clear water. I mean, it's a staple on like Lake Mead, like all the guys fishing the U.S. Open here soon. It's going to be the original U.S. Open, that is, but it's going to be a small jig, a finesse jig on those bluffs. That's a huge staple, just really popping it down those stair steps. Another thing to me that's not as much in the fall, but as far as just bluffs, if you're on any clear water situation, something way overlooked, in my opinion, is throwing a Senko on a bluff wall, man. Having that thing, it's the same concept, right? That hanging process, right? Of just, I mean, literally, like, next thing you know, a 3-pound spot eats it. Wow, that was wild, out of nowhere. And so, to me, yeah, it's kind of either stepping off that thing, and I like throwing a jig on it, or even a flick shake, or a drop shot, a light drop shot coming down those bluffs, or I'm going to be against it and I'm power fishing. Those are kind of the two ways I'm looking at it.
I like all those answers. I think the only one I have that could add to that, well, actually, I'll say two, but the one that, referring to Chickamauga, that I fell in love with last November when I fished an event there, was throwing a big glide bait right next to those bluff walls.
Oh yeah.
I figured that answer would make Caleb happy, but that thing, after seeing, so I went down this bluff wall with a top water, and I had one of the biggest fish in my life, just completely like, cow jumping over the moon over my spook, like was nowhere near eating it.
Hated when they did that.
So Caleb, I wonder if you remember this, is I literally called you after 2 fish did that. And I'm like, dude, what am I doing wrong? Because I'm walking this thing so dang slow, but they won't eat it. And I'm like, and he goes, dude, you got a glide bait? I was like, no, like not on me. I have like an S waiver. And then you brought me a Shine Glide, I think that next day. And I literally go to that same bluff wall, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think this thing will work. And I just chuck it, same line as I throw the spook. And as soon as it hits the water, bam, 5-pounder. I'm like, all right, this dude's a genius. So and after it just took the hooks off because I had a tournament coming up. And then literally like the next 5 casts, you felt yourself getting bumped and slammed out. Yeah. I don't know. I fell in love with the glide bait. But I think another one too.
And in that strike zone.
Another one that you could, I think, is technically a sinking bait, but you can make hang depending on whether you're penduluming, but it also just has a slow fall. In general, is a spy bait. I think that's one you can kind of get freaky with too. Yeah. But
we don't talk about that.
There's been a lot.
Dude, the spy bait, man. Say what?
I've been
learning a lot. Silent capture.
What'd you say, Adam? I didn't hear you.
No, just it's been cool to hear kind of everyone's perspective on things. It's been I've learned a lot. Just listening in on how you guys look at things differently. I really starting to put together more like hang time and things that I think about that make all these baits similar on why they can be effective.
Yeah, dude. I think hang time in front of a fish's face is probably one of the most underlooked aspects of getting a bass to bite something. You know what I mean?
Lethal.
Like, I think that's why jerkbait is so deadly. Like, and it's one thing I wanted to hit on was like I cannot overstate enough the power of a jerkbait. Like, seriously, just insane the power of a jerkbait. Like, even in dirty water, like people, that's another thing. Like, people are like, in the fall, we get a lot of dirty water, and people are like, I'll never forget this conversation. It was me and my dad, and we probably caught 21, 22 pounds of fish on a jerkbait. And like, when I say we caught 21 or 22 pounds, that was our best 5 out of like 30 that day. Like, it was one of those days. You know what I mean? And like, it was probably 2 foot visibility, and we were catching them on a jerkbait. And like the thing was like when this guy pulls up and he's like, "Well, y'all catching them on?" We're like, "A jerkbait." He's like, "It's too dirty for that." And like me and Dad literally looked at each other and went, "Huh, okay, buddy, good to see you, man." And like we just drove off and just kept on fishing. But like, dude, the drawing power of that jerkbait is like, especially in the fall, man. Like all these scenarios we're talking about, whether it be the bait fish or finding them consolidated in an area or finding a school or whatever it is. Like in my book, there's only 2 baits that you can truly like hang in a fish's face, and that's a jerk bait and then some kind of Senko style bait. And even the Senko style bait wanes in that category because it eventually will sink. And so the jerk bait is something you can literally crack it and like make it do a 180 and it just sits there in that fish's face, and then crack it again and it just sits there. And dude, like I think that fulfills every single need to kill and eat, and like it just does everything that a bass needs it to do. You know what I mean? Like it is, I don't even know how to what we could compare it to in like our world, as it's like the thing that you need. You know what I mean?
Chick-fil-A?
But it is the thing. Chick-fil-A, bro. Yes, Chick-fil-A. Yes, the Lord's Nuggies, like a #1 large with a Diet Coke.
Jesus is
Chick-fil-A sauce, like Jesus is chicken. Yes, absolutely. The Lord's Nuggies. It's like it's like if someone goes, "Do you want Chick-fil-A?" You don't go, "No, I don't want Chick-fil-A." You say, "Yes, I want Chick-fil-A," and are you buying? And that's what a jerkbait does for a bass. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
Take my money.
So powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got so many big fish on a jerkbait year round. I mean, dead of summer to dead of winter, doesn't matter. Conditions, like Alex was saying, cloudy, sunny, stained water, you know, shallow water, deep water, you name it. And again, that's that hang time, being able to put a bait in a fish's face and leave it there.
Yep.
And that's another thing too, is experiment with retrieves, experiment with different brands of jerkbait, you know, because Tactical Bassin does some great videos on that as far as like different jerkbaits for different times of the year. And that really does apply. There's certain kinds of jerkbaits that fish like in warm water. There's certain kinds of jerkbaits that they like in colder water. But I'll tell you, one of the most killer retrieves in warmer water when you're getting to the fall, especially in this transition time, you know, a lot of guys are sitting out there cracking a jerkbait, and they're cracking it, you know, just fishing it like everyone knows to fish a jerkbait. Get out there, throw it out there, sweep it like a Carolina rig, stop it, reel up the slack, sweep it again, reel up the slack, sweep it again, reel up the slack, literally that. Or burn and stop it. If you're in the summertime and you get around fish that are schooling and really hard to catch, burn that thing down there, whether it's a silent one or a rattling one. Burn it down there, stop it. Burn it down there, stop it, burn it. And then when you get to where that school of fish is, burn it really hard and just kill it and just leave it in front of their face. And then as soon as you go to turn that handle again, you better hold on because they're going to take the rod from you. Mm-hmm. It's just like treat it like a, you know, it could be a crankbait. It could be a jerkbait. It doesn't matter. Whatever you think it is, it's something that sits there. Mm-hmm. It suspends. Like I do the same thing. I make crankbaits suspend all the time. A lot of my small body cranks, I've weighted out to where they'll suspend. So I can reel that thing down there and kill it and just leave it there. If it's dead of winter, I might leave that thing there 10, 15 seconds. And then all of a sudden my cricket will just start walking off.
And that's one thing that like, I don't communicate it on my videos very often because it's something that I think people, it's like, I don't know, it's like almost I want people to discover it on their own. You know what I mean? It's like I want them to go,
it's like so cool.
I want them to be
figured out.
like I want them to be standing on the water and go, well, that son of a bitch. You know what I mean? Because like I'll be like, you need to be fishing 2x strong hooks on this bait, and you need to be it's a number 6 2x strong hook, and they're like, why are you fishing such a heavy hook? Are you worried about the hooks that are bending out? And I'm like, no, it's not really it. Just like, and it's what it does is it turns this bait into a suspending crankbait and or a slow rising crankbait. And I mean, I have cranks in the box that, you know, Spro rock crawlers and stuff like that, again, letting some juicy information out here, hot take, that, you know, when I reel them down there, they don't go whoop, they reel them down there and they just kind of, and just barely move back up.
It's killer, dude.
It's killer, dude.
You get
like,
one with this.
Yeah. And especially like the winter, you know, late fall into the winter, man, you know, the more turbulent the water gets, the more adverse the fishing conditions get, the more pressure a place has. I mean, whatever factor it is that puts pressure on fish, it makes them not want to eat. It's an instinctual drive of self-preservation, and you have to make that fish go against that self-preservation instinct. And I think as anglers, that's the single hardest thing. That's our single hardest job, is to trick the fish. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think the two ways that we can do that, well, really the biggest way that we do that, and this was said to me, and I wanted this to come up in the podcast at some point or another, because this is probably one of the most prolific things I've ever had said to me in my whole entire life. And it was said to me by a saltwater fishing guide. And he said, you got to make the fish feel like they found it. And I was like, damn, I've never had anybody put it to me that way before.
Women. Dude,
it's the same thing with women. That's it, man. And I was like,
Chick-fil-A. They found Jason's chicken nugget.
I mean, like, dude, like, and when he said that to me, he was talking in reference to redfish and speckled trout. But when he said that, I was like, damn, like, that's it. Like, you got to make these fish feel like they found it. And if that is letting a bait hang in their face, like bringing it to them and then just letting them see it, if that's what makes them feel like they found it, then you've accomplished your job. You've done the most natural thing that you could possibly do, because you have presented that fish with the presentation that is most natural to him. He gets to fulfill his predatory instinct to kill, because he feels like he's got the jump on whatever it is you're presenting to them. And I think that's huge. And, we've gone off the rabbit hole here, but I mean, it's that jerkbait mentality, like a jerkbait fishing kind of idea. And that why I wanted to talk about it is because it is the bait for me that really makes the fish feel like you get to make them react. And then in certain situations, you get to make them feel like they found it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's it's like versatility, but a lot of and I don't know if you guys are the same way, but I've caught a ton of really, really big fish. And if I look back on all these big fish that I've caught, all these 9s, all these 10s and stuff like that, so many of the giant fish that I've caught in the fall and in the spring have been doing less. Mm-hmm. Like, my initial instinct is like Alex, like, I love to power fish. If I can get on a power fishing bite, it is so fun. But dead sticking, I mean, like, some of the biggest bass I've ever caught have been dead sticking a big swim bait, literally throwing out there doing nothing. Some of the biggest bass I've caught have been dead sticking a jerk bait, throwing it out there, cranking it down, and letting the current sweep it through an area, never moving it. A worm, never moving it. A Ned rig, never moving it. Like, do less sometimes, and it's the most thing. It's for whatever reason, like when so many guys don't catch those fish that are in that 8-pound class and up. And I think that's one of the big reasons they don't. It's like, find that bait that can hang there and then do less. Mm-hmm. Get to where that fish is and leave it in that fish's zone. They don't like that. They're territorial. They don't like it when you leave something in the zone, especially if it looks like Jesus' chicken nuggets. They're going to come over there and get it.
Well, and it's like the trout fishing. Like, if you think about trout fishing, and I don't know a lot about it, but the most that I've seen about it, it's a lot of that kind of presentation of doing a lot less. Just make the presentation, let the current do its job, make it look like
the water make it natural.
Yeah, make the water make it natural, and that's how people catch big trout. At least that's what I've been told. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like
all the biggest trout I've ever caught have been like that. It's like literally you throw it out there, make it a light enough weight to where the current can take it exactly where it needs to go. I do it on the river all the time. Like, I literally throw a fluke out there into a seam and then never touch it. Yep. Or I'll throw a Ned rig into a seam and never touch it. Or a Nico.
Until that line just goes.
Yeah, because
you're like, yep, there he is.
They're current oriented. They're going to, like, the bait's going to go wherever the fish is, right? It's just like a fish seeking missile at that point. As long as you get your weight right where it's not just going to sink down to the bottom and get hung. You throw out the missile and you just let it do its thing. Like, I'll literally throw a jerk bait. I'll crank it down. I'll just keep my line tight and just watch this thing like on a full cast and just slowly reel to keep my slack up and let it drift all the way back to the boat. And so many times you'll just see it just like think that line and swing. It'll be like a 5-pound smallmouth.
And I have to give credit to Judson Brock. That is the man who said that statement to me. You got to make them feel like they found it. He's a saltwater guy. He's a red. He's a red fishing speckled trout guide down in South Carolina, and he is the man. So,
that's such a good point, especially Caleb, when you talk about like doing nothing with your bait. It's like, and Joe LaBarbera here is saying the same thing, like fishing the St. Lawrence River, and that's exactly true. And Deacon, I'm sure you can test the same thing. Is a lot of guys I shouldn't say a lot of guys. There's a few guys that I was around that were saying the same thing. Like, and some of my very good smallmouth buddies that are, Great Lakes hammers, they might hate us for talking about this, but like you see a lot of guys drop shot and they'll drop on fish and they're sitting there shaking it. When really, if you just drop it and you let that line slack and let that bait fall naturally, you'll just pick up you'll feel it in the line, or you'll just pick up your slack and your rod was already starting to bend, like it's on there.
Yeah.
And like I was sitting at the campfire with Greg Mansfield the day or 2 days before they wanted to open, and he goes, dude, I drop on him, I move the bait around, I can't get him to eat it. I let it he goes, only way I can get him to eat is if I see him on the graph, I drop down, I leave my line slack, and I just let it go down the current naturally. Because I don't do anything with it, and you pick up, and then there's a 5-pounder.
Yeah. Because you're never going to be able to make your bait look better than the current does.
No.
Never.
Yeah.
It's going to do everything it needs to do by itself.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dude, and that's like, for me, one of my big confidence baits is a Senko style bait, stick bait. I mean, like over the past few years, stick bait for me has just become more and more prevalent just because of pressure. And like a lot of people I see fishing a stick bait, they fish it like a jerk bait. Like they throw it in there and it's like
a fluke.
Yeah, tat, tat, tat. And I'm like, dude, I'm like, and literally like kayak fishing has made me do this bait. That's one of the reasons I've loved my kayak fishing experience, and I've translated it to the boat, is just going, whoop, throw it in there and just go. And it's like, all right, I'm
Check your phone.
Yeah, like I'm gonna be like the old man sipping his coffee, just holding the rod tip. And it's because, in a lot of situations I'm fishing current, I'm fishing moving water. And that current grabs that thing and it starts drifting. And I mean, you just drift it past that spot, making fish feel like they found it, and that line goes tick, and you're catching 4 and 5 pound largemouth. I mean, it's just the greatest thing ever.
It does everything it needs to do by itself. Yeah. You don't need to do anything cool. I mean, one of the biggest punching things, like if you want to catch giant fish punching, like there's one or two things. You flip it in there, you get it to punch through the mat, and you leave it right just on the bottom of the mat, and don't touch it. Just leave it there.
Yep.
And the big fish will come up and eat it off the bottom of the mat. Or the other bite is you let it drop through and you let it hit the bottom and just leave it there.
It's sitting there. Yep. Or pull it halfway up and just leave it sitting there.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many fish like
don't do this. And you see a lot of guys sitting there ripping that thing up and down. And sometimes that is a bite. Sometimes that works.
Sure.
But if you want to catch a monster underneath the mat, kill it.
Yep.
Stop
my mat fishing experiences.
Cool stuff. Let it do its own.
Yeah, I mean, my mat fishing experiences is punch in there and let it hit the bottom, pull it halfway up, pull it all the way to the top, let it sit.
Yeah,
and dude, I can't tell you how many I've had literally letting it set right underneath the bottom. Dude, that or it's like a frog bite. I mean, it's like, it's just you just pick up on them and there they are, and it's like, yep, that's it. Like, and I think it's just that natural presentation of like, it's doing what the bluegill does. It's right up.
Bluegill, they don't do this. They're not doing this. They get to an area and they just suspend there.
Yeah.
And then they swim a little further and they sit there. Like, bluegill don't do this. Crawfish don't do this.
Yeah.
Well, you can make fish react to that. But if
then there's the reaction part of that.
Out of there,
sure. And it all
they like it natural.
And it all has to come into play, right, in your strategy if you're trying to catch a bunch of fish in a day, if you're chasing a big one. But to me, also, you look at bait manufacturers and all these different, and we were talking all about all kinds of stuff before this podcast about secret baits and all this and that. And it's like, when it comes to slower presentations, think about some of the best fish catchers out there. They are baits that don't move. It's the chunk on the back of a jig that literally just goes like this, right? Like it's not doing this. It's just, everything's just so gentle. A tube, man. How many big fish have been caught on a freaking tube? A Senko. It's things that don't make a bunch of movement that are very natural. And when there is a current situation, it naturally flows in that current. It's just, you're dead on. There's either kind of that reaction mindset, or then when you're slowing down, it's like, man, sometimes it's something so simple. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's, if you think about nature itself, I don't care if it's fish or if it's deer or if it's just nature, period. Like your dog, even, like your dog, obviously he'll run around the house and act like an idiot, but like, in day-to-day movements, he just kind of eases around. Deer, they just kind of ease around. Bass do the same thing. Like, I saw some bass up on up in the water column the other day, and I could see them with my eyes. And when I got up on them, they didn't like swim away really fast. They just kind of eased off. You know what I mean? Like that more, I think that's why those baits that don't do a whole lot are so effective, is because it's natural. I mean, it's very natural unless something is in danger of dying.
Yeah.
For it to just kind of just ease. Like it just eases around. Animals ease around. They don't want to expend energy, because the expenditure of energy means that they have to have an intake of energy. And sometimes an intake of energy is not worth the expenditure. You know what I mean? And so it's like this instinctual balance. It's this instinctual push-pull of like, what is this worth to me to make this movement? Whereas we as humans, we don't have to really worry about that in a certain sense. You know what I mean? Like if we want something to eat, we go to the cabinet and we get it. Whereas a bass is a ultimate predator, a true predator. He has to play that push-pull game of what is this worth to me to make this move that I need to make to eat this, or to get away from this, or to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's me, dude. That's the geeky, like, bass fishing side of me. Like, I will get into the science with y'all and we will talk biology.
Dude,
I think that is such a pivotal player in bass catching bass, is knowing what a bass does and why it does it. So
yeah, that's the thing that always in my head. Like when I'm power fishing, make a fish react, because like catching a giant fish on reaction bait is super possible. But the bigger the fish is, I feel like the smaller the strike zone is on that fish. Because like you said, it's like that fish is smart. It's not going to like, a 10-pounder is not going to run 8 foot to eat a rattle trap. It's just not. You're going to hit her in the mouth with it. A 3-pounder might run 5 foot to hit a rattle trap. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about reaction baits, make them react. And that's where finding the spot on the spot is so important. What is the cast that the right fish is on? Make that fish react. And then if he doesn't react to that, when you slow down, slow way down. Don't like fish a drop shot like a crackhead in there. It's like slow way down and put something in that fish's zone and kill it. That's how you catch giant fish.
Hey man, you got any more of that max scent, man? Any more of that max scent, man?
Flatworms? Oh my god, I could just go for another flatworm right now.
Yeah, it's a flatworm, dude. Give me some flatworms, man.
Yeah, that's the way it is, though. It's just like, find a spot on the spot and like try to make that fish react. Like hit him in the head with it and then try to make him react. And then if that doesn't work, hit him in the head with it and kill it and leave it there. Like that's how you catch the fish that a lot of people want to catch.
Oh, my dad dropping it right here. He says, I ease into the Mexican restaurant.
Yeah.
Just ease on down in there and get him some queso, son.
Making me hungry now.
Dude. Yeah, but that's great. That's good stuff. That's funny.
Well, I know we went on like 100 different tangents, but is there anything remaining fall fishing that we should cover before we sign off here tonight?
I'm gonna have to sign off here pretty soon.
I think everyone's beat right now.
Yeah.
I would say my one thing for fall fishing is just go do it. Like go out there, spend the hours, and just go fishing. Like as frustrating as it can be, it can get real good real quick. Like I can't tell you how many fall fishing days that I've gone out there and been so frustrated, and then within 30 minutes, I'm the happiest dude on the lake because I've sacked them up. You know what I mean? Like just go out there and dedicate yourself to this is a time of year where you can really hone that skill of dedication to doing it. You know what I mean? Like where if you're not getting bites, just keep fishing. You know what I mean? Because something is going to happen. Like you really, I don't know. I guess there's a skill to being able to spend 13 hours on the water without getting tired of spending hours on the water without catching fish. And right now is the time to do it, because the dedication to that time of doing it is what's going to get fish into the boat or the kayak or the bank or wherever you guys happen to be fishing.
Yeah. I would say just work really hard. And this is a great time to fish for the one. Fish for the fish that's your goldfish.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Just like your women.
Your goal.
Just look for the one.
Exactly. Go out there and
you
look.
got to treat these fish like women. You got to make them feel like they found it and just look for the one. Okay.
Oh,
that's good. Well, boys, anything the folks should know before we sign off?
Adam, I'll let
keep
you
your
go
head.
first.
Well, I mean, I don't know. The biggest thing, stay on with the fall topic. I mean, keep your head down. It's not like the spring where you can go catch a 2-pounder or 3-pounder on every point and randomly catch a 5 or a 6. Like it's a lot less time getting bit, but when you get bit, it's either a big one or you're around a pile of them. So sit there and be ready. It's kind of delayed gratification. You're going to be
and the work is worth it.
Exactly. And there's less people on the lake, man. It's a good time to be out. So spend time out there.
Yeah.
Amen.
Bunch of people in tree stands, so use the your alone time on the lake.
Right. Unless you're on a 200-inch deer, go catch fish.
Exactly.
Or a giant 8x8 like bull elk. Just go fishing instead. You know what I mean?
I just want to eat.
Yeah. Well, boys, I think that's going to do it. I don't think we're going to close anything out here tonight because I don't have anything for the folks unless, Adam, you do. You want to have a different conversation for when we let these guys go. But if you're good, dude, we're going to close it out right here.
Cool, man.
Yeah. It's good to talk to y'all.
Thanks for having me on. Had a blast.
We'll see you guys. And folks, we appreciate y'all. We'll see you guys on Wednesday.